Hello, welcome back to the Life from Nerds podcast. Hope you're doing well today. We're going to be looking at some of the predictions for 2023 that were released from a lot of fairly influential individuals in the watch community. The reason why I want to do this is it's interesting that within the past week, both Phillips and Hodinkee released sort of their predictions for where watches are going to go over the next year. I'm going to look at an article that was written by Phillips titled Our Biggest Surprises from 2022 and Boldest Predictions for 2023. They basically say, join us in looking back at another record-breaking year for Phillips in association with Box & Russo. Oh, and you won't want to miss what our team forecasts for the rest of 2023. I won't talk about the sort of looking back at 2022. I kind of want to focus on going forward. That's one of the articles we're going to look at. I'm then going to look at an article that was published by Anthony Traina titled The 90's Are In and Everyone Wants Complications from the Holy Trinity, five predictions for the watch market in 2023. Both these articles actually were released around the same time, which is kind of interesting. So it'll be interesting to read through these predictions and sort of have a discussion about them. I'll actually start off with the Hodinkee article. I think this was really well written. I absolutely love Anthony Traina's content. I encourage you to read it if you don't read more of his stuff on Hodinkee. But I'll sort of start off with the fact that the sort of blurb about this is the continued rise of neo-vintage and the oversaturation of Journe and others, and the year we embrace jewelry watches. So there are 5 predictions that he sort of goes into in this article. The first one is actually titled The Year of the Anti-Trend. This is quite interesting in the idea that the prediction is that 2023 is going to see where, the watches that are really in favor with many collectors are probably going to take a little bit of a cool off, take it easy in 2023. It's funny, he starts this one with, I know I promised trends, but perhaps the best thing that could happen in 2023 is the diminishing of trends that have defined the last few years of quote-unquote collecting. And obviously there's some simple watches you can point to, things like the Patek Philippe 5711, and it's quite cool that maybe we're going to see a little bit of a softening of these watches that have become so hyped and so sought after by so many people, that there's so much sort of like a fear of missing out on these watches. He kind of quotes the fact that he saw, or references the fact that he saw a lot of variety at the Miami Beach Antique show, and seeing the variety there kind of shows that maybe there will be other watches that will become more favorable. I think this is a pretty solid prediction. I think coming off of 2022, we obviously saw prices decrease for many of these watches. And to be honest, I think it's good that these are cooling off. I think there was just an absolute rage about some of these pieces. And so, possible recession worries coming up or slowing of economic activity might be a good thing and will maybe lead to some of these watches just cooling off and taking a breather from the highs that they've really seen. What is really interesting is that the second prediction is that neo-vintage watches are going to become more favorable. No longer new, but still exciting is how he describes it. This is a pretty interesting era of watches, this 80s and 90s era of neo-vintage pieces that are in this time frame. And to sort of describe, to sort of quote his article, this year enthusiasts will get more discerning about what neo-vintage watches are exciting and offer true value. Sure, neo-vintage Rolex and Omega can offer value propositions, and don't get me started on 90s IWC, especially as alternatives to new watches that often have wait lists, but these are still mass-produced watches. The true excitement of the 90s was around the rebirth of traditional watchmaking, both in the birth of independence and in large houses refocusing on traditional watchmaking and complications. It's quite cool to sort of think about this as a concept. I do think that neo-vintage Rolex will have a good year because of the value proposition that they have and the wait list that many people have to be on. But it is cool that in the 90s there was more of a focus. There's more of a focus on complication from brands like Breguet and Blancpain and others. And these watches, I think, are going to gain in popularity because people are looking for complications, and affordable complications because of, you know, the prices of modern pieces nowadays when you're looking for something like an annual calendar. So I think this is an exciting time. I think he makes a good point to state that Rolex and Omega are value propositions, but they're mass-produced watches at the end of the day. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're going through this. The third prediction are complications coming back. It's complicated. This was an interesting one. Seems like complications are what people are looking for, whether that's in pocket watches or wrist watches. To quote the article, yes, a lot of this complicated watchmaking comes from the neo-vintage era, but it can take other forms too. Pocket watches, vintage, beyond chronographs, even modern complicated watches like the Gyro Tourbillon that have fallen out of fashion. This year, people will continue to realize that there's serious complicated watchmaking to be had for the same price as a 5711 on the secondary market. I think this is a really good comment and something that I think is an additive to why watches like the 5711 or the hype watches are probably going to fall out of favor, because people are realizing that they can get so much watchmaking for what they wanted to spend on 5711. And because people are impatient, they're going to, obviously try and find an alternative to the watch that they probably can't get their hands on anytime soon. I think complications are quite interesting. This is in contrast pretty well with the Phillips article, so I'll save that some comments for then. But I think the overall message that I'm seeing here is that the watch collector is getting smarter. They're realizing that there's more to watches or more to watch collecting than just what people love and what people have hailed as some of the best watches out there. There are watches like Daniel Roth's and complicated Audemars Piguet's and Gigi Lecoultre Gyro Tourbillons. There's so many watches out there that present so much value and are quite interesting from a complications perspective, other than just a time-only Nautilus. And you can get a lot more enjoyment out of something that might be a little bit more complicated and interesting to research and learn about and wear on your wrist. So I do think that the collector is getting smarter, whether that's from an attrition of those who got into the watch collecting, in the last 2 years for the hype, or those individuals are now maybe they're either falling out of the collecting sphere or becoming more educated. I do think that this prediction is actually a really nice one. The fourth one is a lot of watches are basically jewelry, so let's embrace it. This is pretty cool. There's definitely a revival of jewelry-based models from brands like Piaget, Vacheron, Rolex, and others from the 70s and 80s. This is a interesting prediction, and is based, I think, on what was seen at the Miami Beach Antique Show, and as well on celebrities' wrists. It's an interesting prediction. The problem with jewelry pieces, I think, is they don't fit everyone's sort of aesthetic or style, or what they like to wear on their wrists. And to be honest, I think I would put Cartier within this sort of category, but I think that there's actually a softening from Cartier in the last couple of months, years. I think you saw the results from the last year's auctions, sort of the softening of Cartier, and I think it kind of fits in with this sort of genre of watches. So maybe they will become more popular than they were, but I don't think maybe mass market appeal of these pieces is going to happen. I actually think there's going to be a very select few people who will be interested in these pieces and will add them to their collection if they're interested. The article ends with the fifth prediction, which is that special watches are still special. And really it's just a reality check that the watch market has slowed over the last year. And while there's going to be softening of some watches and strengthening of others, if a watch is truly special, you're still going to see them garner a lot of interest from certain collectors. It's still special if you find yourself with a Cartier Pebble, a pristine Paul Newman Daytona, or a Patek with provenance, which is what is quoted at the end of this article. So I think it's going to be about finding the quality in these pieces and being patient for them to turn up and allow for the market to sort of reset after this hype that has been generated over the last 2-3 years. So I'd say this article I think was great. I like where it ended. I like where it started. 90s I'm not too sure, but I do agree with complications. I do agree with neo vintage. So overall I like the predictions. I think it's a good thought of 2023. The biggest takeaways that I have are collectors are trying to be smarter, whether that's, and again, I'll say this again, whether it's because the people who were buying watches for obscene prices have either left the market or they've become smarter about what they're actually purchasing. I do think that this year is going to be about becoming educated, realizing the money that's being spent on certain pieces and where they should fall, and going to things that are equally as interesting, or equal in price, but maybe just a little bit more interesting, I think is a good thought. I do think returning to traditional watchmaking is a good thought of, neo vintage coming up, especially when it comes to prices being a little bit more attractive. And overall, a watch collector seems, according to the article, it seems that a watch collector is going to try and be patient, or should be patient this year, to find a watch of that's truly special to them in order to build out their collection. I kind of like the last sentence where it says, "For the rest of us, though, 2023 might be a year of patience as the market catches its breath." So it's a nice way to end the article. Again, there will be a link in the show notes if you want to read through that article. Fabulous job. So I'll move on to the Phillips article, which again there'll be a link in the show notes if you want to check that out. I'm going to discuss some of the individuals at Phillips and what their predictions are for the coming year. In the article, they have some of the biggest surprises as well. So you should definitely check out the article to see their biggest surprises of 2022. The article starts off with R.L. Box, senior consultant and watch legend, making his predictions. His prediction kind of actually speaks to a watch that I mentioned previously, which was the 5711. I'll just quote the article really quickly. "Anyone who knows me can testify that I do not like to make predictions because it is my belief that I should rather underpromise and overdeliver than overpromise and underdeliver. Knowing, however, that I cannot avoid sharing a prediction here, and on top of that a bold one, I will say that I expect prices of the Nautilus reference 5711 in steel, the classic one with blue and gray dial, to go up at least 20% in value compared to the low point we saw in the autumn of 2022. This is an interesting prediction and kind of in contrast with the Hodinkee article. Hodinkee, Train obviously was mentioning how the 5711 is kind of softened, and I think people are going to move away from those trendy watches, whereas All Box believes that the Nautilus 5711 is actually probably going to see a nice increase in prices. Now, obviously, Trina was speaking about hype watches or these trendy watches in general, and All Box is speaking specifically of the 5711. I think it's hard to say that the 5711 will plummet in value, but a prediction of 20% is very bullish, and I feel like All Box might be operating with more information than maybe some of us have, and obviously auction houses have that type of information, and so maybe this is is a prediction that will come true. Paul Boutros, head of watches, the Americas, was the next person to make a prediction. And the prediction is that we'll see some exciting new introductions in each of the product lines from brands who are celebrating anniversaries and historic milestones, and also discontinuation of some noteworthy models. He believes that because of this, early examples of watches like the Rolex Daytona, the Heuer Carrera, and the Royal Oak Offshore will see an increase in demand for collectors in 2023. Interesting prediction. I think it's a pretty good one. With watch brands celebrating anniversaries, I should have said this, but it's the 60th anniversary of the Rolex Daytona and Heuer Carrera, and the 30th anniversary of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore. So with brands of such noteworthy watches celebrating these anniversaries, they're obviously going to do something fairly interesting, and that could be pulling from the past. And so the pulling from the past might make those watches from the past increase in demand. And so there's definitely going to be a tension between anniversary pieces and historic models, which I think is a pretty good prediction. Alexander Gottby, the head of watches in continental Europe and Europe, Middle East, and Asia, made the following prediction. We'll see. I'll quote the article. After the incredible increase in demand for steel sports watches, I think we will see a rising interest in simpler time-only dress watches. These will not systematically be austere two-hand watches. Collectors will reopen to the beauty of simplicity, and modern and vintage time-only watches will make a comeback. I love this prediction because I truly love time-only watches. The simplicity of the dials are really what gets me in the beauty and simplicity, I think, is what I really like. This is interesting in contrast with the Hodinkee article, where we sort of talked a little bit more about how complications might become a little bit more popular. I think these watches are a little bit more attractive in accessibility, and I think that's probably why this prediction is a fairly good one. Whether we see this hockey stick growth is another question, but I do think people will sort of broaden what they're looking at instead of looking at the steel sports watches, and maybe look for something a little bit different than what they typically have in their collection. Another one of his predictions was that he thinks that 2023 will see purple become the color of choice for manufacturers. Interesting, definitely an interesting thought. He mentions that the flavor of the year were things like salmon and green in past years, and so purple might be the next thing. I honestly have no idea. I think some brands have used blue in some of their pieces, so maybe that will be where brands go, but I really have no comment on purple, but it'll be cool to see what happens. Obviously, Alex Gottby is a huge independent brand lover, and I think there's other he said he didn't want to forget about his independent watchmakers that he loves. So he thinks that some of the more under-the-radar manufacturers will probably see a little bit of a boom. Recepi, Theo Offert, or to name a couple, are the ones that I think might gain a little bit of steam. Gertrude Wong's prediction for the year was that timepieces that tick the following three boxes will continue to grow over time: scarcity, outstanding condition, and great provenance. I think this is a very safe bet. That as people pause and take a breath, they'll study watches a little bit more and want to find watches that have those three elements: scarcity, great condition, and great provenance. And I think that just is a natural sort of cycle as people get more into the hobby and more selective about the watches they want to add to their their collection. Another one of Wong's predictions was that independence will continue to grow in success in 2023. I think that's a pretty good prediction as well for the reasons that I've mentioned before. James Marks, the director of Phillips Perpetual, came out with predictions that he thinks that we will see two streams of interest from collectors. I see a growing sense that great contemporary references such as the La Mania-based 5970 and reference 5004 from Patek Philippe will soon be considered blue chip, and the arbitrage in price between complications and sports watches will continue to widen. Sensible money should begin to study production volumes, quality, and aesthetics rather than fashion. He also sees collectors focusing on quirky and affordable watches such as the vintage Porsche design provide a link between two different passions, cars and watches, and yet they also have a story that keeps collectors curious. I really like the second prediction. Kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that neo-vintage, kind of 90s watches that Trina made in the Hodinkee article will see some sort of comeback. I find watches from like the 70s quite interesting, and a time period that maybe not a lot of collectors are looking at, but maybe this year will be the time where people start to investigate. Arthur Touchot, international head of digital strategy, made the predictions that modern watches will continue to perform very, very well in live sales, and that online sales will become much more than stopgaps between traditional auction season. So this was a little bit more of a comment about the vehicle for selling watches. So I think it's true. Online will become big, and yeah. Logan Baker, senior editorial manager, said that he thinks that he admits he thinks his forecast is boring, but he thinks that brands and watchmakers will follow a path of gradual evolution this year. This means we can expect continued emphasis on precious metal watches with smaller dimensions and gender-neutral designs. Rolex might look to make a splash around the 60th anniversary of the Daytona, but I don't anticipate any major advancements from the year's remaining anniversary darlings. Blancpain 50 Fathoms, Omega Seamaster, Patek Philippe Aquanaut, Tag Heuer Carrera, and Rolex Explorer. I think it's a fine prediction. I think it's what you would expect from most brands, and probably the direction that you would see these going. As far as me, I rather not pass my judgment about predictions for 2023. I'd rather just see where it's going. I will say that I do think that this is a year of education, where people will try and get a little bit smarter about watches. I think a lot of money has flown into the watch market, whether that's vintage or modern or neo-vintage, and maybe went in at such a fast rate that the money didn't start off with the principles that I find very important in watch collecting, which is taking your time, doing your research, knowing exactly what you're looking for and where watches are coming from, and really focusing on becoming a smarter collector or a smart collector. And I do think that is what 2023 is going to hold. So I think we're going to see people asking the right questions, finding watches that they really truly love, and tick all the boxes that they're looking for. And I think this will naturally lead to a kind of like, we'll call it an invisible hand to the mean being of high quality timepieces that tick many boxes for the majority of collectors, which are things that have been discussed in this podcast, which are quality, provenance, condition, and I think that's overall a really great thing for the watch collecting community as a whole. As I mentioned, there'll be links in the show notes to both these articles. Be sure to check those out. Thanks to Hodinkee and Phillips for making your predictions for 2023. It was fun to discuss them. If you have predictions for 2023, be sure to hit me up. You can check us out on Instagram. Be sure to follow us there, and you can probably you can contact us on our website or any of the other social media platforms, but Instagram is probably the best, probably where you are located too. If you are new to the Life Owners podcast, be sure to follow us. And if you wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. With this said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. And until next time.